Joining us for the first time is State Representative Aaron Johanson. And first of all, I want to make sure, Aaron, to say your name right. So how close was that?
In the old country, you were right on.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But we weren't too educated when we immigrated to America, so we just go with the Johanson.
Johanson, okay. And we have the same thing with Mark DeCoscos, our good friend from Hawaii Five-0, because everybody on the mainland says DeCoscos, and we say DeCoscos because it's kind of proper. Anyway, before we do anything, let's get people that aren't aware of you a little bit more aware of you. A little bit about your background and what made you decide to be in politics, and particularly in clearly the minority party.
Well, Bob, I've always liked a challenge, and I think what was interesting is I was the very one, probably like some of your listeners, casting aspersions on the legislative bodies, and I spent most of my time working in the federal government, and quite honestly, a lot of the time I just felt like I was making lemonade out of the lemons that Congress was passing to us. And,
Sure.
Even when you sit down with them and you say it's certainly your prerogative to do X, Y, and Z, but let us tell you how we might be able to more effectively implement it, you'd either get the glazed over look or you'd just get, this is my dictate and this is what we're going to do, and, go pack sand and make it happen. And it was actually my time in the executive branch, both at the White House and also at the Treasury Department, at the Mint specifically, where I started to think, if the Founding Fathers imbued the legislative branch with this much control, maybe I should work to stop at passing down the lemons.
Yeah, what happens to the kids? That's really an interesting thing. And I need to stop because I was remembering, I read a little bit about the Mint, and I saw the other day where Canada finally decided that's it. We're not going to make pennies anymore, and we're not going to use them anymore. They're going to be gone. How often was that discussed? I mean, are we to a point now where, I know for the numismatic guys and everything else, collecting coins is important, but people say, we could get along with just quarters. I mean, what do you learn with your experience there about the whole business about the Mint?
Well, I tell you what, nothing set off more alarm bells in Washington, D.C. than when Secretary Paulson inadvertently made an off-the-cuff remark once, and it was actually after and ancillary to whatever he was talking about. He said, I'm in favor of doing away with the penny. And the entire Illinois delegation, the Senate and the House immediately called up Treasury and said, what is going on? Because Lincoln is so beloved to them.
Sure.
Their delegation definitely doesn't want to see the penny go away, and it has some market implications. So, the statement was promptly changed to, Secretary Paulson and the Treasury is happy to do whatever Congress would like.
That's so interesting to me because I heard that in Canada, they just decided, it costs more than a penny to make one, so what are we doing? And we've heard that here, too.
Sometimes it does. It really depends on the price of zinc now, because almost, it's a copper-plated coin. Yeah. So, but Canada just does things very differently. They use Coinstar to collect their coins, so they have a much more efficient distribution system of knowing how many coins are actually out there. In circulation than America.
Every now and again, and we could talk for hours on this, but every now and again they do this thing by saying, look, would you stop hanging on to pennies or dimes or nickels because we just, we don't want to make any more. So they say that there are literally thousands of tons of coins just hanging around somewhere.
There really are. In fact, a prime example is everybody was saving their state quarters. Part of the reason that the Mint did so well is
they thought they were going to get valuable, right?
Yeah. When you save your state quarter, it doesn't cost the Mint 25 cents to make it, but that's what the Federal Reserve and everybody else in America pays for it. And so that seniorage, or basically, what in the private sector would be referred to as profit, is what gets returned back to the federal government. So I used to take pride in the fact that I was one of the only federal agencies to return money to the federal government, and it only paid down, sadly, a small fraction of the debt, but at least it paid down some of the debt.
I remember when the state quarter first thing came open, and it renewed an interest in coin collecting that had been sort of waning, and to the point where they said, you know what? They're making so many of these before the Hawaii quarter, unless you get one that a mistake was made on, is going to be worth 25 cents for like many generations because they just make so many.
Right.
Yeah.
There were historically high volumes because so many people were taking them out of circulation to collect.
Did everybody, all your friends, when you started hooking up doing that Mint stuff, did they say, what is that, man? That must be really cool, dealing with shovelfuls of money.
Yeah, people used to say that all the time, and it never got tired to say, I'm actually getting to make money for once instead of just working for the government.
Okay. Well, anyway, the circuitous route took you to the local thing, and of course, I think that we are faced here in Hawaii with a lot of real dilemmas, and I hope that we can discuss some of them from not just your personal standpoint, but get people involved in it a little bit. And as the weeks go on here during this session, we'll be able to find out from you what is meaningful to you personally and to the party, and how people can participate. But I think that since you're the new kid on the block, there's been a paradigm shift in the way we communicate with our legislators. And I noticed you got in here, you're texting right away and all of this stuff. Let's talk about the way you all like to receive input. What's the best way to contact, your office with a question or a complaint or an opinion?
As much as technology has progressed, some of the most effective means of communication are still the ones that are most personal. When someone stops by, certainly they've taken a lot of time out of their precious schedule and their daily lives to stop by. I find whenever I get phone calls from constituents, that still works. But, if you can't do that, email certainly is a really effective way. And the thing I might emphasize to all the listeners out there is the more personal you make it. If you're submitting a form letter that an organization sent you pretty soon, we in the legislature have seen hundreds of them and people stop reading. But, if there's an email from Mike Buck that just says, I really think this is a bad bill, here's my reason why.
You know what? I'm so glad you said that, because we have done that in the past. I know that almost any time that I've received something, I've never just forwarded along, because I do have a position here, and I may not have 40 words, but I love it when somebody says, this is what we sent. And, if you need more background, here's the scoop. But use your own words, because after a while, you're right, seeing 5,000 of the same 3 lines has got to get boring.
The personal is very powerful. That's the main thing that I would emphasize to anybody looking to effectively communicate with the ledge. What
is the drill with regards to the representative, in your case in the House, responsibility to look at this stuff? I mean, does everybody really look at it? How do you prefer to look at your input?
I read the emails myself and respond myself, and it's really important. I mean, I think that's the essence of democracy, and particularly what I love about the House is our constituencies are not so large that you really can see the face behind the email or know the face. I go door to door, whether it's an election or not, specifically to be able to talk to people where they're comfortable and to be that kind of responsive
Here's
government.
a question right off the bat. Somebody says, what district do you represent? And I should have been out with that in the very, very beginning.
I'm glad to get that question because I love my district, and it's one that I grew up in. I represent House District 31, which is Moanalua, Foster Village, Aiea, and Red Hill and Port Shafter.
Which is sort of interesting, I think, because it's one of those, I know that a lot of our districts do, but you actually get to represent the new and the old. I mean, there's new development there. There's a lot of old stuff. So it's not as though it's all a bunch of new families, hungry birds in a nest. You've got people that have history and multi-generational occupation there.
And that makes for what I think is a great microcosm of what exists in the broader state. Before reapportionment, I used to have one of the state's largest public housing complexes as well. So, when you have a broad socioeconomic spectrum or a broad demographic in terms of age or ethnicity, you just get different perspectives, and I think that's healthy for the whole state.
Okay, so is discourse. And if you'd like to join us, it's pretty easy. We're going to start covering some of the stuff that's in the news right now, because that's what I actually invited Aaron to join us on a regular basis to discuss what's on the front page, but more importantly, what's going to be on the front page tomorrow. There's a lot of stuff coming up this week in the legislature, which some of you may not know anything about, and you will in a few minutes. One thing I'm going to bring up is this new Rita Cabanilla bill, talking about giving homeless folks a free trip to wherever they came from on the taxpayer dollar. This morning, Aaron, one of the first things that faced us was this new, what's called the homelessness bill. By Rita Cabanilla. And let's talk a little bit about just how bills get introduced, and a little bit about specifically what you know about this one so far. And I think it's going to be pretty interesting, because what sounds good sometimes maybe isn't so good.
Sure. And I think for legislation, the devil is always in the details.
Sure.
A lot of concepts start out with the right motivation. To answer your question, bills can be started either because a constituent calls us up, talks to us, and says this is an issue, and you investigate and you find out it's a lot more pervasive than just an incidental problem. And obviously with homelessness, it doesn't take much to know that it's a problem.
And for all of us.
Yes.
And certainly it's not just your district or my district, it's everybody's. Yeah.
And so, typically that's the starting point of legislation. People look into different things. I know particularly when I do it, I try to look and see what other states have done for some kind of cross-reference point, or just talk to the experts. Lots of times the experts will tell you there's a structural barrier in their law that precludes a solution, to X, Y, and Z. And so, but with this particular bill, I think not only are there some of the issues that you brought up, but it also starts to beg the question of if you're a smaller state, trying to export your problem. What happens when everybody else decides to pursue the same strategy, and then they decide to export their problem to you? Because it becomes a drain on our social services, and we're not one of the larger states equipped to deal with everybody exporting their problems to us.
There have been, Aaron, in the past, suggestions that other states send us people. And it's not, as far as I know, it's all anecdotal. I've never really, I've actually questioned it. We've actually called some municipalities and some mayors and some governors over the years. Nobody has ever done that. I mean, any more than we would. Wouldn't that be just opening the door for tremendous criticism if you said, well, we send our problems to Hawaii?
Sure, I think so. Yeah. And I think that's
Have you ever heard of anybody that's actually done that?
No, I haven't. I mean, it's all been anecdotal
exactly,
from what I've heard as well.
And so I welcome anybody that's got any evidence on that. The same thing would apply when we take a look at that is when we started discussing a while ago shipping our garbage to the mainland. I mean, there's some problems with that too. Unfortunately, people aren't garbage. So is the homelessness issue, in your opinion, being kicked down the road? I mean, are we not? Why are not we solving this?
I mean, I think it's important to consider that there are a lot of other solutions on the table, and in a vacuum, I don't know if this is the right one, but in concert, the state's done a much better job historically of helping homeless families, where we've not done as good of a job as helping homeless individuals, and sometimes it's because, quite honestly, it's a multifaceted problem.
That's a great point. There are some that say there are probably at least 3, but maybe 4 or more classes of homelessness. And when you talk about a family, we go bend over backwards, especially if the kid's on the beach, to try and say, what can we do to fix this? But there are the perpetual career homeless that everybody's worried about.
Yeah, so, different segments of the homeless population, if it's just based on the lack of economic opportunity, those start to decrease in population when the economy improves. I mean, obviously the state has a lot to do to make things better, to increase opportunity for individuals and families who are struggling. But, there's also mental health issues that persist, drug use, substance abuse, and those are different things to tackle in different ways.
Okay, now, when it comes down to this bill, we'll talk about that specifically, but what you said earlier was, all right, either a constituent or observation or news or something prompts somebody to look at a subject. And you say, in your case, you look at other states for models and everything else. But what about the need? A lot of people suggest, look, why don't we just go back through the laws that we already have? Because doesn't something already cover this? And if not, why isn't it being enforced?
Oftentimes it does. I mean, I think it's a minority of people at the legislature, but I think a smart group of people who often say, sometimes let's just relook at what we already have on the books. We don't always have to create a new law. We don't always have to build and do everything else. Sometimes we just need to look through and refine and hone. And it can be, the amazing thing about the law is it can be a simplistic semantics change of 1 or 2 words that just enables government to be more effective in the way it dispenses services.
Sure, and we know that there's a tremendous amount of stuff here in Hawaii that crosses borders. In other words, something's state and something's county, and something's not. And we have this idea, I guess, that maybe some of the neighbor islands don't have what we have, and likewise. Let's talk about that, particularly with response to, and I know this is a general category, which we're going to get into after the news break, but there are seemingly a number of bills looking at things like gambling, increasing the GET, and some other stuff that are either state or county specific. Let's talk about how you differentiate between something that is good for Maui may not be good for Oahu, and vice versa.
Well, that's always the challenge, and that's why there's 51 of us, and the 16 representatives who are from the neighbor island versus the 35 who are from Oahu regularly get into a debate about is this best for the state or is this really best for the county? And I think that's where we all take our job seriously of representing our district and looking at it from that standpoint.
Yeah, and that's why it must be interesting to explain.
51 egos and 51
folks, and here you are, one of the new kids on the block in a period. Let's talk about, for instance, as you know, over the last several years, we've had regular get-togethers on the program with Representative Gene Ward, who's been, in my opinion, a great example of somebody that can work with both sides of the street. And, and as being the leader in the House of the Minority Party for a number of years, it seems to me that he's placing some importance and some confidence in you. Let's talk about how the passing of that baton went before we get into some of these bills.
Sure. I wouldn't be here without Gene Ward, and he's been a wonderful minority leader, and it's great to have him as our minority leader emeritus, because in many ways he is that that clarion voice and that mentor and guidance that helps the next generation of leadership come into their own. And I'm grateful because he was the one who passed the baton to me.
Yeah, he happens to be my representative because that's the neck of the woods I'm in, and I've always been impressed with his ability to stay connected and focused with the community. And since your community is a diverse one, what did it do to get elected? How did you run your campaign that all of a sudden gave this whippersnapper Republican a shot?
Well, I was lucky. I was blessed. I also was mentored and had the good fortune of following Representative Lynn Finnegan, who did an incredible job. So, it's not a hard leap for people, especially when you've been on the team with Lynn Finnegan before, to make that switch. But I think it's important to just be able to convey your ideas in a way that is relevant to people. And sometimes, quite frankly, as a minority, we haven't always done that the best. We haven't shown the greatest degree of empathy. We don't explain sometimes why our stances on taxes are not just about opposing taxes in a vacuum. It's because it exacerbates an already high cost of living for most people in Hawaii. Making that natural extension, I think, helps.
That's exactly what we're going to do in our next segment of the program. So, with the introductions aside, let's get down to some brass tacks. If you've got some concerns on specific legislation that's facing the group this year, now's your chance to give us a call. Remember, no email. So those of you that are sending me email, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to get at them. Sounded like you were in Australia for a minute. Patrolling down Electric Avenue. And on that subject, I guess the whole deal about the wind power farm on Molokai is in the books. That's history. So we have an opportunity this morning. Aaron Johanson is with us. And he is the minority leader in the state legislature, as you know. We've been talking story in the last segment of the program, a little bit about what got him there and what his background is. Spent a lot of time in the nation's capital, so certainly no stranger to a huge big square building. So now he's a member of this one, and certainly the minority. But that doesn't mean that the minority isn't full of a bunch of good sense ideas and stuff that needs to be talked about. So with that, I want to get into some of the things that are on our mind. And one of that is this them and us that used to exist between the neighbor islands, which we foolishly used to call the outer islands, and here. And with this latest example, we have this opportunity for the development of power to be from one island to the other. Now, when you were a kid and when I was a kid, a long time before that, that would have been like absolutely impossible. But now it's not. I mean, technology's come a long way. Are we addressing this issue, and what do you as a minority leader think of the eventuality of importing some kind of power, whether it be geothermal or wind, from the neighbor islands to where the demand is?
Well, I should start out by saying that not everybody in our caucus feels the same way, so I'm just speaking for myself when I say this. But certainly, whether it's an under-island cable or a building of a grid so that the state is on one grid instead of all these localized grids that make us a little more vulnerable and less energy efficient. I think that that's important for the renewable industry's growth and for us to be able to tap into, really, we're one of the highest renewable energy potential states in the nation. So if that has the ability. With
currently the highest cost of power.
Right.
So we got this opportunity to be recognized in one area and fix the other.
Right. And that's part of what it means to be a state. There are certain localities that do better in some systems, and some people contribute, some people receive. That's part of a state system, I think.
Okay, now, but when you do talk about that, we do actually have the technology to deliver this. And, of course, that comes on the heel of a tremendous amount of discussion, argument, and controversy going on right now on credits, on tax credits and renewables. So let's take a look at that, the solar credits, as opposed to some of the other, there's no other way to say it, but money grabs that look like are going on right now with the potential increase in our GET tax, or with the potential of having gaming or some other revenues. Let's talk about the renewable energy and the tax credits in in the solar industry.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what's always tough and what we struggle with, particularly in Hawaii, because we don't have the most business-friendly climate, is how do you get to a critical mass so that the free market can do what it needs to do, unencumbered by government, and where is there a government nexus to overcome what are exorbitantly high startup costs here? And so what I think you'll see in the solar tax credit, for instance, is it's not going to completely go away. It may not necessarily be as generous as it is now. So, but
is the fear being that a lot of people actually abused some of these credits and took multiple credits instead of just doing the right thing?
I think that's what the Department of Taxation maintains.
Yeah,
I myself am not sure if there was widespread abuse. I know the Council on Revenues suggests that tax credit is bleeding the state coffers, which is why we're taking a look at it. We want to be fiscally responsible, but I think we also have to look big picture as well and think how do we have some economic growth here and in some industries that are actually market friendly.
I mean, we have the same thing in the tech industries with some disappearing credits in film and production and TV. Look at right now this boom we're going through with like Hawaii 5.0 and the opportunity we have for that. Okay, now that being said, since we're taking a look at some of the proposal to increase revenue, let's take a look at gaming. And I know that you can talk as an individual, but we also have some caucus.
Well, I think on this ability. One, the minority caucus.
Where are we with the minority's position on the various bills that have introduced some form or other of gaming?
Mm-hmm. In the past and probably likely in the future, we're united in our opposition against any form of gambling. I think most of my caucus believes that any of the social ills that would accrue would certainly outweigh, the purported economic benefit that any form of gambling would bring.
Do you think, Aaron, that because of the anticipated upswing or the encouragement in numbers, that these bills that probably were going to get a pretty good running chance of being looked at more seriously, at least this legislature going to be put aside thinking, well, maybe we don't quite need it yet?
Yeah, I think we're a little safer from some of the bad ideas that normally get regularly circulated around as the cure-all to our economic woes. And I think that's the case with gambling. I just honestly do not think that there are the votes in the House at all to pass any form of gambling, as I've seen from previous legislative sessions.
Okay, now that being said, let's move on to the next thing. Let's move on to the dilemma that we are facing here in the state about education, because our teachers are drawing a line in the sand. And before we even get into that, let's talk about that one group of teachers that the HSTA wasn't thrilled with, that came up with a proposal for a education tax of a penny, which means the GE tax is getting looked at.
Well, and that bill actually came to the floor the other day, and there were quite a few no votes and quite a few reservations because they had blanked out the specific percentage, and the section that used to talk about a certain DOE sub-account that the money would go into was also blanked out of the bill. So, in
other words, that's just a bill for more money.
Right, and that's certainly our fear, and that's why everyone in our caucus who was there voted no on it. I think we all want to make sure that education is funded. Look, as a Moanalua graduate myself, the public schools, I think, have
by the way, let's point that out, because I think you have to understand, even if you're not in Aaron's district, Moanalua to Yale, I mean that's not exactly a direct beeline in most people, It is
at Moanalua.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that we've got certain schools, and I think thanks to things like robotics and some of the other stuff, that our kids are cracking up. But yet we do have these reports that continually come out on how much we need to do to change our public education system.
I think it's like everything. There's always room for improvement, and we got a lot of great ingredients, I would say, in the public school system, and we're just trying to find and refine, rather, the recipe for success. And that changes with time. We're in the 21st century and having to look at what education looks like in that context.
What has one-party rule done for the kicking down the road, all the things, the infrastructure of some of the schools, the buildings, the cumbersome retirement system where we've got so many people being paid that are no longer connected with schools? You don't have to look down the end of that barrel to see that the numbers aren't working.
Well, I think, any time any entity, any governmental entity becomes so large, it becomes difficult to manage, and it becomes difficult to always see complete transparency, and that's what you find with the DOE. I think there are a lot of capable people who are trying to make it transparent, but an over $1 billion bureaucracy is going to be cumbersome to manage and cumbersome to dispense services, no matter what agency it is. So I think it's less specific to the DOE and more specific to it is such a large entity with so many holdings and with so much under its jurisdiction that sometimes it can be almost a little bit unwieldy to manage.
There are going to be other bills, and maybe you can shed the light on what some of them might be, that are going to be looking at different pay-as-you-play fees and this kind of thing. Is the drive for more revenue overpowering the investigation for less expense?
I'm not going to lie. Certainly, the overwhelming bias of the Capitol is typically to look for more revenue rather than to make the harder decision and see what are core services of government and what are things that just could either be more effectively dispensed or just how do we look at our continuing mission of government. So certainly there's a bias toward let's just grow the revenue. I think what's absent often from the conversation at the legislature, though, is really if we had a better, more dynamic economy, which sometimes means we have to take a look at taking things off the books, different things that encumber the small businesses out there in our economy. We can grow revenue just because the economy is growing. More people are working. People are better, higher-paying jobs.
Yeah, there's a lot of concern. We'll talk about the Council of Revenues and what impact that has on the way we spend. And when we come back after a short little break with Aaron Johanson, you're going to get the opportunity right now. Those of you that are calling, stay on point. Call Raphael right now. Get you on the air. 296 KHNR is the number. That's 296-5467. One of the things that we're going to take a look at is not just some of the ways that things are increasing, but what about our very, very big industry called tourism? And what sort of reaction is there out there in the industry that is fighting against this proposed hike in increase in the TAT, or the Transit Accommodation Tax, which some already feel is too high? Is it going even higher?
Happy days are here again. The skies are blue.
Yeah, let's put a chicken in every pot, right? We said that, all right? Happy days are here again. Well, that's what we hope every time the legislative session goes into session. Our happy days here. Well, look. And I can tell already, I'm just getting, like many of you, to know Aaron Johanson a little bit, the Minority Speaker of the House. I can already tell that he's a half-full glass guy. And I'm not sure, Aaron, that anybody could do what you all do if you weren't that way. I mean, nobody could wake up a pessimist every day and go to work and think they're going to get something done. What do you attribute that to?
We're trying to make happy days here again, and that's what we do every day. But believe me, we're all aware of the 60 days and the countdown to sine die and when we finish. But
can we fix this boat? I mean, we're running around, we're leaking a little bit, and this is not just here locally but nationally. Thank goodness we seem to be rebounding here a little bit. And I know that there's a big picture, but could you get out of bed and go to work every day if you didn't think we could fix this?
It'd be difficult, and I certainly would just go do something else with my time. But, the state is worth it, our people are worth it, and it's worth that fight. And I think not only do my 7 in the Minority Caucus believe that, but at some level I think so do the other 44. And everybody's just trying to make a difference.
Yeah, by the way, let's talk about that a little bit, because sometimes you go through fierce moments and battles and everything else, and then everybody goes to lunch. I mean, this is important, isn't it, to have this feeling that you can go to the representative of the district next to yours, who's a Democrat, and say that we have a mutual concern here.
Sure, and I think that's part of the depersonalization of politics, and what we're trying to do here on the state level is to buck that trend. More often than not, people just attack the person rather than the policy. But long term, that doesn't do anything for whatever we're advocating. So, I think you see, especially now, we're in a coalition government. That's how we organize the House. You have to have some personal relationships to be able to have some real efficacy policy-wise.
Yeah, good point. And let's talk about that. We've got 3 or 4 prongs of the economy here. We've got the state government. We've got the military. We've got a little ag still left, thank goodness. And we've got this big 800-pound gorilla in the corner of the room called tourism. And I do know that the administration right now is looking at, and there are bills that are being looked at to increase the TAT, which is already, in some people's opinion, as high as it can get. How fragile is that? The visitor economy obviously is against it. How much can we bleed that cow?
And I don't think we can do it a whole lot more, because quite honestly, Hawaii is an amazing special place, but there are a lot of places that offer the same geographic beauty at a cheaper price. And if they haven't necessarily been as effective at undercutting us, but we've heard from tourism authorities that the Caribbean and other places are much more effectively trying to grab some of our market share. So if we continue to make it more costly, people will eventually stop coming here because they just can't.
Yeah, I think that goes to another thing, and that is the ongoing, seemingly better cooperation. We talked a little bit early in the program, folks, with Aaron about homelessness. We've got a number of things that people bring back to wherever they come from based on their Hawaii experience. And I do know that there's a lot of concern, particularly on the neighbor islands and that about dangers that we have and other things. So let's talk about just sort of the way the state can sort of mentor this industry. I mean, are we providing enough security for our visitors? What do we do what do we do for damage control when bad stories get out about Hawaii?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think, the HTA has done a great job of spearheading that. Very capable leadership there. And, not only are they putting out the positive message, but they're very, very active in responding to issues, whether some of them you saw at APEC dealing with that. So, it requires that proactive stance. But I think just continuing to make Hawaii a special destination location, whether it's because of cultural tourism or ecotourism, expanding that market so that it's not just you come to Hawaii, you go to a beach, but what else do you do so that we can spur further economic development here?
Well, it seems to me that we've gone a long way in the private sector that relies on the tourist dollar. They've extended themselves with their wallets. I mean, they've done wonderful market. We just take a look at some of these companies like Outrigger that put, $500 million of money into reclaiming Waikiki. What about helping the tourism industry right itself by not increasing that tax?
Agreed. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are against increasing the TAT. And what's more, now that we're in better economic times, I think typically infrastructure credits for the hotel industry come up. I don't think they have this year, but they may come up in the future to help offset some of the costs and that private investment.
How have we done with taking a look at cutting expenses? I know that nobody likes to hear those things, and it's really difficult because we've got all these hungry birds in the nest. I want to talk about how the legislature reacts to need, and then when they get down to the practicality, the family side of it, by saying, I know we need a new car, but we can't afford one yet. How do you guys deal with that?
Sometimes the legislature is not as nimble as it needs to be in responding to changing times and differing contexts. And so there's not a whole lot of mechanisms in place other than, the cabinet departments to say how a program is working or not working or what the need is. And typically, the usual refrain is that the need is great, we need more. And sometimes, I get that some department heads come in and they'll say, we're not asking for any increase, things are fine, we don't need to change anything, or we don't need, some of these particular functions anymore.
Yeah, I must give credit to the current administration and the Lingle administration for coming out with mandates to their departments at different times saying, okay, show me the numbers, and then show me them less 10, less 15, less 20%. I haven't seen anything like that this time, and I do know that a tremendous amount of what you are doing during this session affects the governor's ability to produce a budget. Our budget seems to be continually increasing. Do you think the public's been made aware of that enough? I mean, it's not all everything's fine. I mean, we're spending more than we're making.
And what's more is if you keep growing the budget, those are long-term costs passed down along the line. So it's not just what you're paying for today, it's what you're obligating for tomorrow. And, I think particularly on the Finance Committee on the House side and as well as on the Ways and Means side on the Senate, everybody's very sensitive to the fact that yes, we are experiencing economic recovery, but it's still fragile. And for us, it's always perilous. Today's recovery could be tomorrow's recession for us because we're so dependent on discretionary spending.
Yeah, cross your fingers, my friends, that nothing happens outside of Hawaii that makes the planes stop coming, because that's what I'm always worried about. Okay, I've grilled you for the better part of an hour. Let's talk a little bit about, by the way, the H3 Kaneohe bound is backed up for miles. So if you're starting at the tunnel, either use your helicopter or go the other way. Right? Let's talk about a couple of the pet projects that you have, Aaron. I mean, this week is going to be a very busy week. What are some of the things that you think are important? And if people want to react to them, what's the best way to do it?
Well, again, the best way to always get in touch with us is to lobby your own legislator because they're the ones who are most going to be responsive to you. But
get on Google, find Aaron Johanson if he's in your neighborhood and in your area, or even if not, since he's a minority speaker, is give him a jolt. But what are some of these specific bills?
I think definitely watching some of the TAT bills. They're all TAT or transient accommodation tax increases. Making sure, I don't think the general excise tax increase is going to go anywhere, but because that's going to hit all of us, and particularly the lowest income earners as well as middle income earners.
Could you explain that? Because we've heard that said a lot of times. I 100% get it, but I know a lot of people don't. You think, well, it's only a penny. It's only a penny. But the people that are going into stores on a daily basis, spending those pennies, are the ones that can least afford an increase of any kind. So how does it affect them more than, say, it affects somebody who doesn't care?
Sure. Somebody who doesn't care or somebody who has a lot of income can probably afford to pay, a few more pennies, which is why it doesn't impact them as much in their wallet. But for people who are already, stretching their dollar way beyond the elasticity of paper, a few more pennies.
By the way, it doesn't stretch very well. We've all tried it. They rip.
That's right. That's right. That's why we used to propose the dollar coin all the time at the Mint. But, a few more pennies at the cash register, but even all the pennies that are accrued along the line of when they finally get that product because of the transport costs, where the general excise tax is applicable, the sales costs, the production costs, that's a whole lot of change that people just don't have.
I can't believe that Lowell Kalapa from the Tax Foundation has any hair left at all, because he must be pulling it out every time he hears this. I think the real important other one is, and even though I don't usually accept email, I've got one that I thought of actually myself, but several people have asked via email today, is what about the proposed tax on individual items, i.e. a sugar tax or a soda tax, penny an ounce kind of thing? Isn't that just another way they're looking to try to get more money in the system?
Yes, I agree. Yeah. It's a money grab. And, the legislature is very good at finding all kinds of creative vehicles to do it and all kinds of good causes
we call
to brandish.
We call it the Yabbit bills. Yabbit. I know we don't have any money, but Yabbit, we need this one.
That's aptly titled.
Yeah.
And, but those will all increase the cost of living. And, I think, quite frankly, most people in Hawaii cannot afford an increase in their cost of living.
What are some of the areas that you've had an opportunity to look at where we can be introspective and maybe save some money on? What are some of we're not talking about pennies now. We need to save millions. What are some of the areas that could use for some caution or some maybe rollbacks a little bit?
Well, I think we're looking at infrastructure and how we provide services. And right now we've got a lot of infrastructure and services provision that, were built on models from decades ago. So how do we be more nimble with our use of technology and with use of things? I also think there's quite a few bills in the ledge that talk about the procurement code and changes to that. We have a system that basically begs sometimes to be taken advantage of because through cost modifications and costly contracts. So just looking at how we can better provide services at a best price for the taxpayer, I think is optimal.
There you go. Aaron Johanson will be back next week. We're going to do this on a regular basis. I want to thank all of you for listening this morning, and Aaron, thanks for getting here bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and we look forward to spending more time together, and particularly with regards to these specific bills, because I know that there's a lot of them, and I know that sometimes people just if they don't know when to say what to, we're just not going to get anywhere.
Great to be here.
Yeah. Okay, we got more coming up when we get back after the news break. This is KHNR Hawaii's Intelligent Talk. More intelligence coming up.